At 8:59 a.m. on February 19th, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein crouched in a landing craft 200 yards off Iwo Jima, watching the beach through the smoke and thinking about Private Jimmy Morales. Morales had died 4 months ago on Bougainville, caught in a Japanese ambush in the jungle, pinned down with his squad, trying to return fire with an M19 19A4 machine gun that weighed more than he did. The gun was accurate. It was reliable, but it was bolted to a 14-pound tripod and took 2 men to move. And when the Japanese came through the jungle fast and close, there wasn't time for 2 men or tripods or setting up proper fields of fire. Morales died trying to reposition the gun. Stein had watched it happen. 3 days later, Stein found a wrecked Navy dive bomber near the beach at Empress Augusta Bay. The aircraft was totaled, crumpled like paper, 1 wing sheared off, cockpit burned out. But the Browning A&M-2 machine gun from the wing mount was intact. Stein was a toolmaker from Dayton, Ohio before the war. Parents were Yugoslav immigrants who'd worked metal their whole lives. His father in a forge, his mother in a textile factory with industrial looms. Stein had been working lathes and presses since he was 14. He understood tolerances, stress points, how metal wanted to move. He looked at that aircraft gun and saw something the manual didn't. The A&M-2 fired 200 rounds per minute, double the rate of the M19. It weighed 21 pounds without the aircraft mounting hardware. Light enough for 1 man to carry, fast enough to win a close fight. It was also completely unsuitable for ground combat. The gun had spade grips designed for a gunner sitting in an aircraft turret. No sights, no stock, no way to aim it accurately. The barrel was designed to be cooled by 300 mm with model wind at 10,000 feet. On the ground, it would overheat in seconds. Stein didn't care about what it wasn't. He cared about what it could be. He found an armorer, a guy named Little from Philadelphia, who'd worked in his father's machine shop before enlisting. Stein showed him the aircraft gun, told him what he wanted. Little said it was crazy, said the gun would shake itself apart, said if it exploded in Stein's hands, the Corps would deny it ever existed. Stein said he'd take that risk. They worked at night in the maintenance tent, using tools scrounged from damaged equipment. Cut down the buttstock from a broken M1 Garand, welded it to the receiver, mounted the sights from another Garand, added a bipod from a Browning automatic rifle, built a custom trigger mechanism because the original spade grip system wouldn't work with a rifle stock. The whole thing violated Marine Corps regulations about unauthorized weapons modifications. If an officer saw it, Stein could face a court-martial. If it malfunctioned in combat and killed him, there'd be no official record of why. But on November 25, 1940, when Private Colby's patrol got ambushed in the jungle, Colby had a hastily modified aircraft gun with a bipod strapped to it. He dropped to the ground and fired 400 rounds in 30 seconds. The Japanese attack broke apart. Colby came back alive. Everyone in the patrol came back alive. Word spread quietly. Soldier to soldier, the way solutions always spread when the official answer doesn't work. Stein used his modified gun on Bougainville for 2 months. Killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day, men who'd been invisible to everyone else, men who'd been killing Marines one at a time from concealment. The Stinger's rate of fire let him saturate an entire area in seconds. If a sniper was there, he'd either die or run. But there was a cost. The gun, 8 ammunition. A 100-round belt lasted maybe 40 seconds of sustained fire. The barrel got so hot after 200 rounds that the weapon became dangerous to hold. Stein had to carry extra barrels, extra ammunition, extra everything, and even then he was constantly running out. When the Paramarines were disbanded and Stein transferred to the 5th Marine Division in late 1944, he brought the Stinger with him. His new company commander, Captain Caldwell, looked at the weapon and asked what the hell it was. Stein explained. Caldwell said it wasn't regulation. Stein said he knew. Caldwell let him keep it anyway. By January 1945, Sergeant Mel Grevich had built 5 more Stingers for the company, 1 for each rifle platoon, plus 1 for himself. They finished the last gun 2 days before the 5th Division shipped out for the invasion. No time for testing, no time for adjustments. Just 6 Marines carrying weapons that officially didn't exist. Now, Stein was 200 yards from a beach that intelligence said was lightly defended. 3 days of naval bombardment, B-29 strikes. The island should have been neutralized. Through the smoke, Stein could see the beach. Black volcanic sand, no cover, no concealment, just open ground rising in terraces toward the interior. He could hear the naval guns still firing, could smell the cordite and sulfur. The Marine next to him, a kid named Henderson from Arkansas, 19 years old, was gripping his M1 Garand so hard his knuckles were white. Henderson asked Stein if the bombardment had gotten them all, if the Japanese were even still there. Stein looked at the beach, looked at the black sand and the terraces and the invisible hillside beyond. Thought about Morales dying because his weapon was too slow. Thought about the 5 snipers on Bougainville who died because the Stinger was fast enough. He said, "We're about to find out." At 9 a.m., the landing craft's ramp dropped. The noise hit first, not rifle fire, but the industrial roar of overlapping machine guns from positions no one could see. The beach erupted. Marines fell before they even cleared the ramp. Stein was the first man out of his boat. The black sand gave no purchase. Stein's boots sank 4 inches with every step, and the 75-pound combat load felt like it was trying to drag him backward into the ocean. 20 yards inland, Company A hit the first terrace, a natural rise in the volcanic ash that provided maybe 8 inches of cover, and the Japanese opened fire from positions no one could see. Marines dropped. Some fell mid-stride like someone had cut their strings. Some made it to the terrace and died there, clutching wounds they couldn't understand. The firing didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere at once. The interlocking fields of fire that Japanese engineers had spent 8 months designing. Stein went to ground behind the low ridge and tried to understand the geometry of death around him. The Japanese had built pillboxes into the hillside, concrete reinforced positions with 6-inch firing slits, invisible until you were already dying in their field of fire. 30 yards ahead, one of those positions was methodically killing Marines. Stein could hear the rhythm of it, the pause while the gunner traversed his weapon, the burst, 5, 6 rounds, someone screaming, the pause, the burst. He looked at the Stinger in his hands, the weapon that had killed 5 snipers on Bougainville. The weapon Little had warned him would shake itself apart, the weapon that officially didn't exist. Stein thought about Private Morales, who died 4 months ago trying to reposition an M19 that was too heavy, too slow, too late. Thought about Henderson, the kid from Arkansas who'd asked if the Japanese were even still there, now dead 10 yards to his left, with half his skull missing. The Stinger weighed 25 pounds, fired 2 rounds per minute. He'd tested it on Bougainville, but never like this. Never against concrete pillboxes designed to withstand naval bombardment. What if Little was right? What if the modifications failed under sustained fire? Private Jacobs was hit 15 yards ahead, dragging himself backward through the sand with one leg shattered, leaving a trail of blood in the volcanic ash. Nobody was going to help him. Everyone was pinned. Stein stood up. The decision wasn't tactical. It was arithmetic. Stay here and watch Marines die one by one, or do something so stupid that it might somehow work. He walked forward toward the pillbox, firing the Stinger from the hip. The recoil hit him like a physical blow, heavier than anything designed to be fired standing. The weapon bucked hard, trying to climb right out of his hands. The custom stock that he and Little had welded on Bougainville dug into his shoulder. The bipod rattled. Something in the trigger assembly felt wrong, loose, imprecise. But the tracers were reaching out, sparking off concrete. Finding the 6-inch firing slit for 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Japanese gun kept firing. Stein kept walking forward, kept the trigger down, watched the tracers pour toward that tiny opening, and thought, it's not working, it's not penetrating, the weapon's not powerful enough. Then the Japanese gun went silent. Stein didn't know if he'd killed the gunner or just suppressed him. Didn't care. He charged the position while the enemy was silent, got close enough to see the firing slit clearly, aimed carefully, and held the trigger down. 20 rounds per second, 60 bullets in 3 seconds. The Stinger's barrel started to glow, faint red at first, deepening with every burst. The weapon was heating faster than he'd expected, faster than it ever had on Bougainville. The pillbox stopped returning fire permanently. Behind him, Company A started moving again. Stein looked for the next position, saw a muzzle flash from a bunker 50 yards to the right. His hands were already blistering from the heat radiating off the Stinger's barrel. The weapon felt different now, looser, like something had shifted in the mechanism. But Marines were dying. He charged the second position the same way, standing, exposed. The Stinger hammered in his hands, and the Japanese fire tracked toward him, kicking up sand in a line that walked toward his position. He adjusted his aim by instinct. No time for sights, just point and fire. The second pillbox fell, then a third. On the fourth position, the Stinger jammed. Stein was 20 yards from a Japanese machine gun nest when the bolt locked forward on a half-chambered round. The firing had stopped mid-burst. He was standing fully exposed in the middle of a kill zone with a weapon that had just failed, exactly the way Little had warned him it would. The Japanese gun swung toward him. Stein dropped to the ground, hit the magazine release, racked the bolt 3 times, hard, violent motions that probably damaged something, but cleared the jam, slammed the magazine back in. The whole sequence took maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds of lying in volcanic sand waiting for the burst that would kill him. The Japanese fired high. Bullets cracked over his head. Stein rolled left, came up firing. The Stinger worked. The jam had cleared. The weapon poured fire into the pillbox until it stopped shooting back. His hands were shaking. The Stinger's barrel was glowing cherry red now, bright enough to see in daylight. The stock was too hot to touch. He'd fired maybe 600 rounds in 20 minutes. The weapon was on the edge of catastrophic failure. By 10:30 a.m., Stein had destroyed 8 Japanese positions and killed 20 enemy soldiers. His platoon had advanced 200 yards inland, farther than any other unit on the beach, and the Stinger's bolt was locked back on an empty chamber. He looked at the weapon, at the glowing barrel, and the empty ammunition box, and the modifications that were barely holding together. The 100-round belt had lasted maybe 90 seconds of actual firing. He'd burned through 8 belts, 800 rounds, and the weapon was one malfunction away from being a 25-pound piece of scrap metal. The ammunition resupply point was back at the beach. 200 yards behind him, across the entire kill zone he'd just crossed, Japanese artillery was shelling the waterline every 30 seconds. Mortar rounds were dropping randomly. Machine gun fire from positions he hadn't found yet was still sweeping the open ground. Going back meant crossing all of that again, alone, exposed with a weapon that might not survive another firing sequence. Stein looked at Private Jacobs, still dragging himself backward through the sand with his shattered leg, 20 yards behind the line now, completely alone. He made a decision that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Stein took off his helmet, 3 pounds, took off his boots, 4 pounds. His feet immediately burned on the volcanic sand, but he could run faster. Then he slung the Stinger across his back, grabbed Jacobs under the arms, and started dragging him toward the beach. The sand burned through his socks. Sharp particles of volcanic glass cut with every step. Artillery rounds were impacting 50 yards to his left, close enough to feel the concussion in his chest. Machine gun fire kicked up sand to his right. Stein ran straight through it all, half carrying, half dragging Jacobs, heading for the waterline where the landing craft was still unloading supplies under fire. He made it to the resupply point, got Jacobs to a corpsman, grabbed 3 ammunition boxes, 30 pounds, and the Stinger's spare barrel that he'd stashed that morning. The original barrel was warped from heat. He could see it when he held it up to the light, a slight curve that would destroy accuracy and probably cause a catastrophic jam within another 100 rounds. He swapped barrels right there on the beach, working with blistered hands while artillery impacted around him. The barrel change took 90 seconds. He'd practiced it dozens of times on Bougainville, but never under fire, never with his hands burned and shaking. Second trip, Corporal Davis, chest wound, couldn't walk. Stein carried him on his back, brought back more ammunition. The Stinger jammed again on the return trip. Different problem this time. The magazine feed was catching. He cleared it without stopping. Muscle memory from 100 malfunctions during training. Third trip, a Marine whose name he didn't know. Kid from another company, wounded trying to advance. Stein brought him back, got more ammunition. The Stinger's trigger mechanism was getting worse. There was play in it now, a looseness that meant something was coming apart. By the fourth trip, word had spread. Marines were watching for Stein. When he appeared, running barefoot through the artillery fire, feet bleeding, carrying wounded men and ammunition, they knew they could move forward, knew he'd clear the next pillbox, knew he'd come back if they got hit. Fifth trip, Sergeant Morrison, shrapnel wounds, bleeding from a dozen places. Stein got him to the beach, swapped the Stinger's barrel again. The second barrel was already overheating, already starting to glow. This weapon was never designed for sustained ground combat. It was designed to fierce in short bursts with 300 wind cooling the barrel. On the sixth trip, the Japanese figured out what he was doing. Machine guns tracked his movement. Mortars adjusted their aim. They were trying to kill him specifically, targeting the one Marine who kept coming back. Stein adjusted his route, zagged when they expected him to zig, used shell craters for cover, ran through smoke from burning landing craft. He was operating on instinct now, no thought, just movement and survival. 7th trip, Lance Corporal Chen, both legs hit, couldn't feel anything below his waist, heaviest Marine Stein had carried yet. He got Chen halfway to the beach before a mortar round impacted 15 yards away. The blast threw them both sideways. Stein's ears were ringing. Chen was screaming. The stinger had taken shrapnel, 2 small dents in the barrel shroud, but still functional. Chen asked him why he kept coming back, why he didn't just stay at the resupply point where it was safer. Stein was bleeding from a dozen small wounds. His feet were hamburger. His hands were blistered so badly he could barely grip the stinger. He looked at Chen, at this wounded Marine he'd never met before today, and said, "Because you're still out here." 8th trip, 4:15 p.m., the last wounded Marine he could reach. The Stinger's magazine wouldn't seat properly anymore. He had to force it. The barrel was on its 3rd replacement. The weapon had fired over 2,400 rounds that day, and it was genuinely amazing it still worked at all. That day, February 19th, 1940, the first day of Iwo Jima, Company A took their objective. They advanced farther than any unit on the beach. They destroyed more Japanese positions than any other company in the battalion. Behind them, the beach was littered with wounded Marines who'd survived because one man with an unauthorized weapon had made 8 trips through hell to bring them home. That night, Captain Caldwell found Stein near the command post trying to fix the Stinger's trigger mechanism with hands that were burned so badly he could barely hold tools. Caldwell asked if the weapon had held up. Stein looked at the Stinger, at the dented barrel shroud, at the loose trigger assembly, at the stock that was cracked from recoil stress, at the modifications he and Little had built on Bougainville that had somehow survived 2,400 rounds of combat they were never designed to withstand. He said, "It jammed twice. The barrel needs replacing every 800 rounds. The trigger mechanism is failing, the stock is cracked, and it saved 30 lives today." Caldwell asked if Stein could do it again tomorrow. Stein thought about Morales dying with an M19. He couldn't move fast enough. Thought about Henderson dead on the beach because nobody could suppress the pillboxes. Thought about Jacobs and Davis and Morrison and Chen, all alive because an unauthorized weapon had worked just barely well enough. He said, "Yes, sir, I can do it again." He did it for 9 more days, until March 1st, when a Japanese sniper killed him during an assault on a pillbox near Airfield No. 2. He'd left a hospital ship against orders to rejoin his unit for the assault. Tony Stein was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation mentioned the 8 trips, the 20 Japanese soldiers killed, the wounded Marines saved. It didn't mention the Stinger. The weapon still didn't officially exist. Private First Class Danny Colville saw the Stinger for the first time on February 20th, 1940, the second day of Iwo Jima, and it changed everything he thought he knew about Marine Corps weapons doctrine. Colville was a machine gunner with Company F, 26th Marines, pinned down 400 yards north of where Company A had fought the previous day. His M19A4 was set up behind a shattered tree trunk, providing covering fire for a platoon trying to advance across open ground toward a Japanese strong point. The gun was working exactly as designed. 31 pounds of precision machinery, 14-pound tripod. Sustained rate of fire, 40 rounds per minute. Effective, reliable, completely inadequate for what was happening around him. The Japanese had spent the night reinforcing. The pillbox his platoon was trying to destroy had interlocking fields of fire with two other positions. Every time Marines tried to advance, crossfire cut them down. Colville's M1919 could suppress one position, but not all three simultaneously. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this battle, not the rhythmic hammering of a standard machine gun, but something else. A continuous, tearing roar, like fabric being ripped apart at enormous scale. 50 yards to his right, a Marine was standing fully exposed, firing a weapon Colville had never seen before. It looked like an aircraft gun, the distinctive barrel shroud of a Browning AN-M2, but modified with a rifle stock and bipod. The Marine was firing from the hip, walking forward into enemy fire, and the weapon in his hands was pouring out tracers at a rate that made Colville's M1919 look slow. The Japanese pillbox stopped firing. The Marine charged it. 30 seconds later, the position was destroyed. Colville watched the Marine move to the next pillbox. Same tactic, same weapon, same impossible rate of fire. Within 10 minutes, 3 Japanese positions were silent, and Company F was advancing again. That Marine was Corporal Tony Stein, but Colville didn't learn his name until later. What he learned immediately was that there was a weapon in this battle that worked better than anything the Marine Corps had officially issued. After the assault, Colville found the Marine with the strange weapon near a shell crater, changing the gun's barrel with the hands that were wrapped in dirty bandages. He asked what the weapon was. The Marine, Stein, said it was a Stinger, said Sergeant Grevich had built 6 of them back in Hawaii, said they weren't exactly regulation. Colville asked if Grevich could build more. Stein looked at him with an expression that suggested he'd been asked that question a lot in the past 24 hours. He said, "Grevich is dead, killed yesterday afternoon, but there are 5 more Stingers still in the fight. You see one, you'll know it by the sound." By February 22nd, every machine gunner on Iwo Jima knew about the Stinger. Not through official channels, not through briefings or tactical updates or chain of command. The word spread the way solutions always spread when the official answer doesn't work. Soldier to soldier, whispered conversations during lulls in the fighting, pointing at distant battles and saying that sound, that's one of them. Corporal James McKittrick, Company E, 27th Marines, heard about it from a wounded Marine being evacuated to the beach. The Marine said he'd seen a guy with a modified aircraft gun destroy 4 pillboxes in 20 minutes. Said the weapon fired so fast it sounded like one continuous explosion. Lance Corporal Robert Hayes, Company B, 3rd Marines, heard about it from his platoon sergeant, who'd heard about it from a runner who'd been with Company A on D-Day. The sergeant said there were only 6 guns in the entire division. Said Tony Stein had carried one. Said Stein had made 8 trips across a kill zone to bring back ammunition and wounded Marines. Private First Class George Chen, Company I, 24th Marines, didn't hear about it at all. He saw it. February 23rd, during the assault on Mount Suribachi, a Marine with a Stinger charged a Japanese machine gun nest from 50 yards out, firing from the hip, and the enemy position disintegrated under sustained automatic fire that lasted 7 seconds. Chen was a rifleman. His M1 Garand held 8 rounds. He could put all 8 on target in maybe 12 seconds if he was fast. The Stinger had just fired probably 140 rounds in 7 seconds. The math was simple. The Stinger could deliver more firepower in 10 seconds than a rifle squad could deliver in 2 minutes. But the Stinger had problems that became obvious once Marines started watching them in action. Private First Class Danny Colville, the machine gunner who'd first seen Stein on February 20th, kept notes. Informal observations. Things he noticed watching the 5 remaining Stingers operate over 3 days of combat. Problem 1. Ammunition consumption. A 100-round belt lasted approximately 40 seconds of sustained fire. The M19 could fire 450 rounds before needing to pause for barrel cooling. The Stinger burned through ammunition so fast that gunners were constantly running back to resupply points. Colville watched one Stinger gunner make 4 ammunition runs in a single afternoon. Problem 2. Barrel life. The ANM-2 was designed to be cooled by 300 mph wind at altitude. On the ground, the barrel overheated catastrophically. Colville saw one Stinger's barrel glow cherry red in daylight. The gunner had to change barrels every 800 rounds, roughly every hour of intermittent combat. The M19's barrel could last an entire day. Problem 3. Mechanical reliability. The Stinger's modified trigger mechanism failed under sustained use. Colville watched a Stinger jam during an assault on February 24th. The gunner cleared it in maybe 5 seconds, obviously practiced, but those 5 seconds of vulnerability in the middle of a Japanese kill zone were the difference between life and death. Problem 4. Weight and portability. The Stinger weighed 25 pounds loaded, lighter than the M19, but still heavy for sustained carry. Plus ammunition, plus spare barrels. A Stinger gunner carried roughly 60 pounds of equipment versus 45 pounds for an M19 crew split between 2 men. Despite these problems, every machine gunner Colville talked to wanted one, because the problems were tactical, solvable, the kind of problems you could work around with training and planning. The M19's problems were fundamental. It was simply too slow for the kind of fighting happening on Iwo Jima. February 12th, Company F was dug in near the 2nd Airfield when Colville heard that distinctive tearing roar again, a Stinger, maybe 200 yards north. Then the sound stopped, abruptly, mid-burst. Colville knew what that meant. Mechanical failure, or the gunner was dead. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant William Morrison, made a decision that violated about 6 different sections of Marine Corps protocol. He told Colville to go find that weapon and bring it back. Colville said, "What if the gunner's still alive?" Morrison said, "Then help him fix it. If he's dead, we need that gun." Colville found the Stinger 150 yards away, lying next to a Marine who'd taken shrapnel from a mortar round. The Marine was alive, but unconscious. The weapon had jammed, catastrophically. The bolt was locked forward on a ruptured cartridge. The barrel was warped from heat. Colville had no authorization to touch this weapon. It wasn't his equipment. It probably wasn't even legal. But he'd watched Stingers operate for 5 days. He'd seen gunners clear jams, seen them change barrels, learned by observation what the manual would never teach him. He pulled the barrel. It came off easily. Grevich's design used a quick change system, borrowed from the original aircraft mounting. No spare barrel nearby. The wounded Marine's gear had been scattered by the blast. Colville found a barrel 30 yards away, half buried in volcanic sand. He swapped the barrel, cleared the bolt, worked the action 3 times to make sure it was functioning. The Stinger was operational. Colville dragged the wounded Marine to a corpsman, then brought the Stinger back to his position. Staff Sergeant Morrison looked at the weapon, looked at Colville, said, "You know how to use that?" Colville said, "I watched. I think I can figure it out." Morrison said, "Then it's yours, until someone with more authority tells me otherwise." By March 1st, the day Tony Stein died, there were 7 Stingers operating on Iwo Jima. 6 original guns built by Sergeant Grevich in Hawaii. 1 recovered from a wounded gunner and pressed into service by a machine gunner who'd learned to operate it by watching. No official authorization, no training manuals, no supply chain for spare parts, just Marines teaching other Marines how to keep unauthorized weapons functioning under combat conditions. Private First Class Danny Colville used his Stinger for 3 weeks, learned its quirks, learned to anticipate jams by the sound of the firing cycle, learned to change barrels in under 30 seconds while under fire, learned to carry extra ammunition in improvised pouches because the standard issue gear couldn't hold enough for a weapon that fired 200 rounds per minute. He destroyed 11 Japanese positions with it, provided covering fire for dozens of assaults, made 7 trips back to ammunition resupply points, carrying 3 wounded Marines to safety in the process. On March 18th, a mortar round impacted 5 yards from his position. Colville survived with shrapnel wounds. The Stinger took a direct hit and was destroyed beyond repair. He asked the armorer if there were any more. The armorer said no, said all 7 Stingers were either destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. Said there was talk of building more back in Hawaii, but the battle would be over before they arrived. Colville went back to the M19A4. It felt slow, inadequate, like fighting with one hand tied behind his back. The battle for Iwo Jima ended on March 26, 1940. Of the 6 Marines who carried Stingers ashore on D-Day, 3 were dead and 2 were wounded badly enough to be evacuated. Only one, a Marine whose name Colville never learned, survived the entire battle without serious injury. After the island was secured, Colville tried to find information about the Stinger program, asked his company commander if more would be built, asked if the weapon would be adopted officially. His commander said there was no official Stinger program, said the weapons had been unauthorized modifications. Said the Marine Corps appreciated improvisation, but weapons standardization existed for a reason. Colville said, but they worked. They saved lives. His commander said, officially, they didn't exist. 3 months later, back in Hawaii, Private First Class Danny Colville was reassigned to a machine gun training unit. His job was to teach new Marines how to operate the MNA. He taught them the official manual, the proper firing positions, the correct procedures for barrel changes and malfunction clearance. But when the training was done, when the new Marines asked him what combat was really like, Colville told them about a weapon that officially never existed. He told them about Tony Stein making 8 trips across a kill zone, about Sergeant Grevich building 6 guns in a workshop in Hawaii, about the sound a Stinger made, that tearing roar that meant Marines were advancing and Japanese positions were falling. He told them about improvisation, about solving problems when the official answer wasn't good enough, about Marines teaching other Marines how to keep fighting when the manual didn't cover the situation they were in. One of the new Marines asked if the Stinger would ever be adopted officially. Colville said, no, but that's not really the point. The point was that when Marines needed a weapon that didn't exist, they built it. When they needed to learn how to use it, they taught each other. When the official supply chain couldn't support it, they improvised. The Stinger died on Iwo Jima. All 7 guns destroyed or damaged beyond repair. No official records, no procurement orders, no place in the military supply system. But the lesson survived, written not in manuals or after-action reports, but in the memories of Marines who'd watched unauthorized weapons change the course of battles. That lesson would resurface again in other wars, with other improvised solutions, because the fundamental problem never changed. Sometimes the weapon you need doesn't exist yet, and sometimes the only way to get it is to build it yourself in the middle of a war. Tony Stein's Medal of Honor citation mentioned the 8 trips. The pillboxes destroyed, the lives saved. It didn't mention the Stinger. The weapon still didn't officially exist, but every Marine who'd fought on Iwo Jima knew what that tearing roar meant. And they'd tell the story to anyone who'd listen. James McKenna died on June 3, 2006, at age 88 in a nursing home in Long Beach, California. The obituary in the Long Beach Press-Telegram mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic in the Pacific Theater. It mentioned his garage where he'd worked on engines for 42 years. It mentioned 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a Purple Heart he'd received for wounds sustained during a Japanese air raid on Doadura Airfield in September 1940. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner that changed how P-38 Lightnings flew. Did not mention the 80 to 100 American pilots whose lives he probably saved. Did not mention that he'd violated Army Air Force regulations to save those lives. Tony Stein died on March 1st, at age 24 on Iwo Jima, killed by a Japanese sniper while attacking a pillbox near Airfield No. 2. His Medal of Honor citation, read aloud at the White House on October 5, 1940, mentioned his skillfully improvised weapon. It mentioned the 8 trips across the kill zone, the 20 Japanese soldiers killed, the wounded Marines saved. It did not mention the word Stinger. Did not mention Sergeant Mel Grevich, who built 6 of them in a workshop in Hawaii. Did not mention the armorer Little, who helped design the first prototype on Bougainville. Did not mention that the weapon was unauthorized, illegal, and officially never existed. This is how military innovation actually works. Not through procurement offices and engineering committees and official channels, but through sergeants and mechanics who see problems and fix them without asking permission. And then the military forgets, officially, deliberately, because acknowledging that unauthorized modifications save lives means acknowledging that the official systems failed. 3 weeks after Tony Stein died, the Navy issued Technical Directive 118-45 regarding unauthorized modifications to standard issue weapons. The directive didn't mention the Stinger by name. It didn't need to. The language was precise. Field modifications to weapon systems using non-standard components or altering factory specifications are strictly prohibited. Personnel found in possession of modified weapons will face disciplinary action. Unit commanders are directed to confiscate any weapons not conforming to technical specifications. Lieutenant Colonel David Ross, who'd been the executive officer of 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima, read the directive, and understood exactly what it meant. The 7 Stingers that had helped take the island were now officially contraband. Ross had watched the Stingers operate, had seen Stein make those 8 trips, had seen other Marines using them to destroy pillboxes that conventional weapons couldn't touch. He knew they'd worked. He also knew that officially acknowledging them would require explaining why the Marine Corps hadn't issued adequate weapons for the assault in the first place. Ross sent a memo to Division Headquarters. Reference Technical Directive 1-840. All modified weapons have been destroyed in combat operations. No examples remain in unit inventory. The memo was technically true. All 7 Stingers had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair by the end of the battle. What the memo didn't mention was that Ross had personally ordered 3 damaged Stingers shipped back to Hawaii for disposal instead of being destroyed on Iwo Jima, had quietly passed them to an armorer named Sergeant William Hayes with instructions to egg-woman these for engineering insights. Hayes understood. He took the 3 damaged Stingers apart, documented Grevich's modifications in detailed technical drawings, noted the barrel overheating problem, the trigger mechanism failures, the ammunition consumption rates, all the things that needed to be fixed if these weapons were ever going to work properly. Then Hayes filed the drawings in a storage locker at Marine Corps Base Hawaii and never spoke of them again. Because that's how military institutions handle embarrassing innovations. They don't deny them entirely. That would be dishonest. They just quietly file them away where nobody will find them. In 1948, 3 years after the war ended, the Marine Corps Equipment Board conducted a review of weapons performance during Pacific operations. The review included testimony from 127 Marines who'd fought on Iwo Jima. Interviews covered everything: rifle performance, machine gun reliability, flamethrower effectiveness, tank armor, naval gunfire support. Private First Class Danny Colville, who'd operated a Stinger for 3 weeks, was interviewed on May 14, 1948. The interviewer asked about machine gun performance. Colville mentioned the M19A4, talked about its reliability and weight. Then he mentioned the Stinger. The interviewer stopped writing, asked Colville to clarify what he meant by Stinger. Colville explained: modified AN-M2 aircraft gun, custom stock, bar bipod, rate of fire around 1,200 rounds per minute. The interviewer said, "There's no record of any weapon matching that description being issued to Marine units on Iwo Jima." Colville said, "That's because they weren't issued. They were built by Marines in the field." The interviewer made a note, asked if Colville had any photographs or physical evidence of these weapons. Colville said no. All 7 had been destroyed during the battle. The final Equipment Board report, published in October 1948, mentioned the M19A4's performance on Iwo Jima in detail. Recommended minor modifications to improve reliability did not mention the Stinger. In the classified annex to the report, the section marked "for official use only," there was one paragraph: multiple sources reference unauthorized modifications to aircraft weapons for ground use. Insufficient documentation exists to evaluate these claims. Recommend against pursuing further investigation to avoid encouraging unauthorized field modifications. Translation: we know they existed. We know they worked. We're not going to acknowledge them because that would set a bad precedent. The problem wasn't secrecy. The military didn't classify the Stinger or hide its existence behind black budgets and national security concerns. That would imply the weapon was important enough to be a secret. The problem was embarrassment. Acknowledging the stinger meant acknowledging several uncomfortable truths. First, the standard issue M919A4 machine gun was inadequate for Pacific Island combat. It was too heavy, too slow, required too many men to operate effectively. Marines knew this. The Equipment Procurement Office apparently didn't. Second, Marines in the field solved this problem themselves without authorization using salvaged aircraft parts. They identified a need, designed a solution, built working prototypes, tested them in combat, and distributed them informally. All while officially, none of this was happening. Third, the unauthorized solution worked better than the official one. The Stinger wasn't a desperate improvisation that barely functioned. It was a genuinely superior weapon for close-range assault on fortified positions. Marines who'd used both preferred the Stinger despite its problems. Fourth, the institutional response was to prohibit it, not to study it, not to improve it, not to issue official versions, but to ban it and pretend it never existed. These are not the kind of truths that military institutions like to acknowledge in official records. In 1960, a military historian named Colonel Robert Walsh was researching Medal of Honor citations for a book about Marine Corps valor in World War II. He came across Tony Stein's citation, saw the reference to Stein's skillfully improvised weapon, and became curious. Walsh interviewed 12 Marines who'd served with Stein on Iwo Jima. All of them mentioned the Stinger. All of them described it in similar terms: modified aircraft gun, extremely high rate of fire, chronic overheating problems, devastatingly effective. Walsh contacted the Marine Corps Historical Division, asked if they had any records of these weapons. The Historical Division said no. No procurement records, no maintenance logs, no technical specifications, no photographs. Walsh asked how that was possible if multiple Medal of Honor witnesses had seen them in operation. The Historical Division said if no official records exist, then officially they didn't exist. Walsh's book, published in 1960, included a footnote about Stein's weapon. Corporal Stein's improvised weapon was reportedly a modified aircraft machine gun, though no official records confirm this. The weapon's specifications and origin remain unclear. That footnote is as close as the Stinger ever came to official acknowledgement. In 1991, the same military historian who tracked down James McKenna about the P-38 cable modification tried to find surviving Stingers or documentation about them. He found nothing. The 3 damaged weapons that Sergeant Hayes had shipped back to Hawaii in 1940, gone. Probably scrapped as damaged equipment sometime in the 1950s. The technical drawings Hayes had made? Lost. The storage locker where he'd filed them had been cleared out decades ago. The historian filed Freedom of Information Act requests, asked the National Archives for any records mentioning Stinger, modified A&M, or improvised machine guns Iwo Jima. Found nothing beyond Stein's Medal of Honor citation and a few scattered references in unit after-action reports, vague mentions of automatic weapons without specific identification. He interviewed the surviving Marines who'd used them. By 91, there were maybe 20 left alive. They all told the same story: 6 weapons built by Grevich, used by Stein and others, destroyed by the end of the battle. The historian asked if any of them had photographs. None did. Cameras weren't common on Iwo Jima, and Marines carrying unauthorized weapons generally didn't want photographic evidence. He asked if any of them knew where the weapons had gone after the battle. None did. Dead, destroyed, lost. The Stingers had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. In 2003, one of the Marines contacted the historian, said he'd found something while cleaning out his garage, a spent cartridge case that he'd kept as a souvenir from Iwo Jima. He thought it might have come from a Stinger. The case showed scenes of having been fired at exceptionally high pressure and temperature. The historian had the cartridge analyzed by a ballistics expert. The expert confirmed the firing pin strike, chamber pressure marks, and heat discoloration were consistent with a weapon firing at kin 200-plus rounds per minute. It was the only physical evidence that the Stinger ever existed. One spent cartridge case, fired 58 years earlier on a volcanic island in the Pacific. This is why Tony Stein's story matters. Not because one Marine did something extraordinarily brave, though he did. Not because an improvised weapon worked better than official equipment, though it did. It matters because it shows how military institutions handle innovation that comes from the bottom up instead of the top down. When sergeants and mechanics solve problems without authorization, the institution faces a choice: acknowledge that the official systems failed, or pretend the unauthorized solutions never existed. The military almost always chooses the second option, not out of malice, but out of institutional self-preservation. Because acknowledging bottom-up innovation means acknowledging that the people at the top missed something important. James McKenna's piano wire tensioner eventually made it into official P-38 designs, but only after Lockheed claimed credit for the modification, and only after McKenna's name was scrubbed from the records. The Stinger never made it that far. It just disappeared, leaving behind nothing but memories and one spent cartridge case. In 75 years after Iwo Jima, a group of military historians and Marine veterans petitioned the Marine Corps Historical Division to officially recognize the Stinger as a legitimate weapon system used during World War II. They submitted testimony from surviving veterans, compiled references from Medal of Honor citations and unit records, provided technical analysis based on witness descriptions, made the case that this was a significant piece of Marine Corps history that deserved official acknowledgement. The Marine Corps Historical Division reviewed the petition for 8 months, then issued a response. While personal accounts suggest that modified aircraft weapons may have been used by individual Marines during Pacific operations, insufficient documentation exists to confirm these weapons as an official part of Marine Corps arsenal during World War II. Translation: we believe they existed. We're not going to say so officially. Tony Stein is buried in Calvary Cemetery in Dayton, Ohio. His gravestone mentions his Medal of Honor, mentions the date he died, doesn't mention the Stinger. Sergeant Mel Grevich is buried in a military cemetery in Hawaii. His gravestone lists his rank and unit, doesn't mention that he built 6 weapons that helped win the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. James McKenna is buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His gravestone mentions his service in the Army Air Force, doesn't mention the P-38 modifications that probably saved 100 lives. This is how real military innovation gets remembered, not in official records or procurement documents or technical manuals, in gravestones that don't mention the most important things these men did, in stories passed from veteran to veteran, in one spent cartridge case in a historian's archive. The lesson survives even when the evidence doesn't. When you need a weapon that doesn't exist, build it. When the official answer doesn't work, improvise. When regulations say you can't, do it anyway and deal with the consequences later. Because sometimes the difference between victory and defeat, between living and dying, comes down to one mechanic with a piece of piano wire and one Marine with a modified aircraft gun. The military will forget. It has to protect itself from acknowledging its own failures. But the Marines who were there, who watched Stein make 8 trips across a kill zone, who heard that distinctive tearing roar of a Stinger firing at 200 rounds per minute, who survived because unauthorized weapons did what official equipment couldn't, they remember. And they pass the story on. In bars and VFU halls and Marine Corps reunions, to sons and daughters and grandchildren, to new Marines who ask what combat was really like. The story survives because it has to. Because the next time someone needs a weapon that doesn't exist, they need to know it's possible to build one. They need to know the institution will deny it afterward. And they need to know that's not a reason not to try. Tony Stein knew. James McKenna knew. Sergeant Grevich knew. The official records forgot. But the lessons survived. That's how innovation really works in war.